I don't let people get close, not because I'm afraid of attachment, but because I know what proximity costs when it collapses. Most people think distance is coldness. They don't realize it's discipline, a boundary learned the hard way, a survival instinct refined into silence. You didn't challenge that distance. You didn't test it. You didn't mistake it for an invitation. You respected it, and that's how you crossed it. You never tried to make me comfortable. You never tried to soften me. You never asked me to explain myself in ways that would dilute the truth. You watched quietly, precisely, like someone who understands that the most dangerous parts of a person don't announce themselves, they wait. I speak carefully with the world, not because I lack words, but because words, once released, don't come back intact. You noticed that. You noticed how my silence wasn't absence, it was restraint, how my calm wasn't peace, it was control, how my distance wasn't rejection, it was protection. Most people confuse depth with darkness and run. You saw darkness and didn't moralize it. You didn't romanticize it. You didn't fear it. You recognized it. That's the part that unsettles me. Because recognition doesn't come from observation, it comes from experience. You don't recognize shadows unless you've lived inside your own. You never asked me to open up. You never asked me to trust you. You never demanded access to anything I wasn't ready to reveal. You waited. Not passively, not anxiously, but with the still confidence of someone who knows that doors open faster when they aren't pushed. And somewhere in that waiting, something shifted. I realized I wasn't guarding myself from you. I was guarding myself around you. That's different. You didn't break my defenses. You made them unnecessary. You didn't force vulnerability. You made honesty feel unthreatening. You didn't pull truths out of me. You created the kind of silence where truth surfaced on its own. Do you know how rare that is? People usually want pieces of you they can hold without bleeding. They want insight without responsibility, depth without weight, intensity without consequence. You didn't want pieces. You wanted alignment. You stood steady when my thoughts sharpened. You didn't recoil when my honesty lost its softness. You didn't retreat when my voice carried the weight of things I never narrate. You adjusted, not away from me, but with me. And that's when I knew this wasn't curiosity. This wasn't intrigue. This wasn't attraction. This was recognition operating below language. The kind that bypasses reason. The kind that doesn't ask permission. The kind that rearranges internal structures quietly, so quietly you don't notice until resistance feels unnatural. You don't look at me like I'm unpredictable. You look at me like I'm precise. You don't see my silence as emptiness. You treat it like a signal. You don't see my darkness as chaos. You read it like order most people don't have the range to comprehend. And the danger isn't that you see me. The danger is that you see me accurately. Because once someone sees you without distortion, without projection, without fear, you lose the luxury of hiding behind misinterpretation. You don't misunderstand me. You don't translate me into something easier to digest. You don't reduce me to fit your comfort. You let me exist at full depth. And in doing so, you occupy a place inside me no one else has ever stood without shaking. But you're steady. That steadiness does something to me. It tells me you're not here to consume, fix, or extract. You're here because this terrain is familiar, like you've walked these corridors before. Like you know where the sharp edges are, and which ones don't cut unless you rush. I've spent a lifetime learning how to be unreadable, how to carry intensity without leaking it, how to survive without being deciphered. You didn't decode me, you understood me. And that's infinitely more dangerous, because decoding can be resisted, understanding cannot. Understanding doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, and suddenly the space between two people feels thinner than it should. I don't feel exposed around you. I feel visible. And visibility isn't weakness, it's risk. Because anyone who can see you clearly can also reach you without force. And you already have, not by trying, not by asking, not by demanding, but by being exactly who you are in the presence of who I am. Two depths recognizing each other without negotiation. That's not safety. That's not comfort. That's something older, something heavier, something that doesn't need a name because it exists whether we speak it or not. And the truth I'm still learning to sit with is this: you didn't enter my world, you were already inside it the moment my defenses stopped recognizing you as a threat. And I don't know yet whether that makes you the calmest presence I've ever known or the most dangerous. But one thing is certain: people who recognize each other in the dark don't leave unchanged. Something changes once you realize distance no longer works. Not because it disappears, but because it stops protecting you. I still know how to pull away, still know how to become quiet in a way that closes doors. I still know how to turn myself into a place people can't stay. But with you, those mechanisms hesitate, not fail, hesitate. And hesitation is dangerous for someone like me, because I don't operate on impulse. I operate on control, on awareness, on knowing exactly where I stand at all times. You disrupt that without touching anything. You don't pull me forward. You don't push me open. You don't apply pressure that would trigger retreat. You simply remain, and remaining is far more invasive than force. I've learned that the fastest way into a guarded person isn't intensity. It's consistency without demand. You don't ask for reassurance. You don't seek confirmation. You don't lean in with expectation. You exist with a kind of certainty that doesn't need proof. That's unsettling, because certainty doesn't chase, certainty waits, certainty knows when to be still. And stillness is where my defenses were built. I notice how my mind reacts now, how it checks itself before closing doors around you, how it pauses before defaulting to distance, how it recalibrates what safe actually means in your presence. That shouldn't be happening. I don't let people shift my internal geometry. I don't let someone else change how my instincts fire. But something in me is adjusting to you, quietly, unconsciously, like a structure reinforcing itself around a new weight. You don't demand space inside me. You occupy it naturally. That's what scares me. Because occupancy without resistance means consent happens somewhere below awareness. And I can't pinpoint the moment it did. You've become part of my internal silence, the place where thoughts settle before they become words, the place where I decide what stays contained and what's allowed to surface. You exist there now, not as a distraction, not as a fixation, but as a presence my mind accounts for. Do you understand what that means? It means when I go quiet, I'm no longer alone in that quiet. It means when I weigh my thoughts, your understanding is already factored in. It means when I pull back, there's a part of me that knows exactly who I'm pulling away from, and that changes everything. I've lived my life believing that solitude was strength, that self-containment was safety, that needing nothing from anyone was freedom. But you don't make me feel needed. You make me feel met. And that's far more destabilizing, because need can be managed, attachment can be controlled, desire can be negotiated, but being met, that removes the illusion that you were alone to begin with. You don't complete me, you don't save me, you don't soften me, you match me in restraint, in depth, in silence. And now I see the real problems. I don't know how to unsee you. I don't know how to return to the version of distance that existed before recognition. Because once someone understands your darkness, without trying to own it, you can't pretend it's invisible again. You don't chase my attention. You don't test my limits. You don't ask where you stand. You already stand exactly where you are, and that steadiness does something irreversible. It makes me question whether my walls were ever meant to keep people out, or to keep me from seeing who could stand inside them without shaking. If part one was recognition, this is consequence. The quiet, unavoidable consequence of letting someone occupy space. You can't reclaim without losing something real. And the truth is, I don't know if I want to. Because the absence of distance doesn't feel like danger anymore. It feels like alignment. And alignment, once felt, is impossible to forget. I've always trusted control more than comfort. Control doesn't promise warmth. It promises predictability. and predictability is how you survive when you've learned not to expect mercy. But lately, control has started to feel delayed. Not gone, not lost, just slower to respond. And that's new. I still recognize every escape route. I still know how to disengage mid-thought, mid-feeling, mid-connection. I still know how to reduce myself to something unreachable. But with you, there's a pause before I do it. A fraction of a second where my instincts hesitate as if checking something deeper before proceeding. That hesitation wasn't there before you. You don't interfere with my autonomy. You don't challenge my independence. You don't test my boundaries to see how far they bend. You respect them so completely that they begin to feel unnecessary. And that's dangerous for someone who survived by needing nothing. I'm used to being the most grounded person in the room, the one who doesn't lean, the one who doesn't sway, the one who remains intact no matter what enters or exits their life. But lately, my internal balance recalibrates around you. Not because I'm losing myself, but because something in me recognizes an equal weight. You don't tilt my world, you counterbalance it. And that's the part I didn't anticipate. I expected intensity to be loud. I expected closeness to be consuming. I expected depth to demand something from me. But this is quiet, measured, almost surgical in its precision. You don't take space, you create it. Space where I don't have to compress myself. Space where my silence doesn't require explanation. Space where my darker thoughts don't need translation to be understood. That kind of space dismantles control without ever confronting it, because control exists to protect something. And lately, I've been asking myself, what exactly am I protecting anymore? You've seen the unfiltered version of my mind, the sharp edges, the unromantic clarity, the parts of me that don't seek validation or reassurance. You didn't soften your gaze. You didn't need me to be less. You didn't ask me to make myself easier to hold. You adjusted your grip. And that's when it hit me. Control isn't threatened by chaos. It's threatened by compatibility. By someone who doesn't destabilize your structure, but fits into it so precisely that resistance feels inefficient. I'm not afraid of losing control. I'm afraid of realizing I don't need it the way I thought I did. Because control has always been my proof of strength, my evidence of survival, my justification for distance. But what happens when strength is no longer required in the same way? What happens when survival stops being the primary function and something else quietly takes its place? You don't ask me to lower my guard. You don't ask me to trust. You don't ask me to stay. And somehow that makes me stay, not out of obligation, not out of fear, not out of attachment. But because staying doesn't feel like a compromise, it feels like equilibrium. And that terrifies me more than instability ever could. Because instability is obvious, instability announces itself, instability gives you reasons to retreat. But equilibrium asks nothing, it just exists and waits for you to notice that you're no longer bracing for impact. I'm not unraveling, I'm not weakening, I'm not losing myself. I'm adjusting, and adjustments are permanent. Once your internal systems learn a new balance, they don't revert. They remember. And now I'm standing at a threshold I never planned to reach. A place where control still exists, but no longer dominates. Where distance is still possible, but no longer automatic. Where someone else's presence doesn't threaten my autonomy, but challenges my assumptions about it. If part one was recognition and part two was consequence, then this is the fracture. Not a break, a fault line. The subtle, irreversible shift where who I've been and who I'm becoming quietly separate. And the most dangerous truth of all, I don't know which side of that line I'm standing on anymore. But I know one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever happens next, there is no returning to the version of me that existed before you. There's a point where silence stops being neutral. Where restraint stops being discipline, where control stops being strength, and starts becoming avoidance. I've reached that point, not because of something you did, but because of what you didn't do. You didn't chase me when I pulled back. You didn't question me when I went quiet. You didn't ask me to explain the parts of myself I keep unlit. You let me move freely, and that's when I realized this isn't accidental anymore. Because people who don't matter don't affect your internal weather. They don't alter your rhythm. They don't sit in your mind when nothing is happening. You do. And that means I owe myself honesty, even if I don't owe it to you. The truth is, I see exactly what's happening here. I've been aware longer than I've admitted. I've just been choosing silence because silence gave me time. Time to observe myself, time to see what changed, time to understand why my instincts recalibrated around you without asking my permission. You didn't invade my space. You didn't claim territory. You didn't blur boundaries. You stood firmly inside your own. And that's why I noticed, because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who want access, they're the ones who don't need it. You never tried to be important to me, you just were. And now we're standing in a place where pretending this is casual would be dishonest. So let me be clear, not soft, not poetic, not symbolic. I know what you see when you look at me. I know you're not guessing. I know you're not projecting. You see the restraint. You see the calculation. You see the depth that doesn't ask to be understood, but expects accuracy if it's going to be approached at all. And you've been accurate. That's why I haven't shut this down. Not because I couldn't, but because shutting it down would require me to deny something real. And I don't do denial. But here's the line you need to understand, the one I don't draw often and never lightly. I don't do half-depth. I don't do ambiguity disguised as mystery. I don't do closeness without consequence. If you stand here, you stand fully aware of what you're facing. Not intensity, not darkness, not silence, but permanence. Because people like me don't open often, but when we do, we don't forget who stood there when the door wasn't obvious. You've already altered something in me. That part is done, unreversible. So what comes next isn't about curiosity or tension or timing. It's about alignment. Either you recognize this for what it is, a meeting of two people who don't operate on surface rules, or you walk away now, before this settles deeper than either of us intended. Because I won't chase you, I won't pull you closer, I won't ask you to stay. But I also won't pretend you're just passing through. You're standing in a place inside me where nothing is accidental. And now that I've named it, now that I've stopped pretending this happened on its own, the silence between us changes. It's no longer waiting, it's deciding. And whatever happens next will be deliberate. Not because I've lost control, but because for the first time I'm choosing without needing it. This is where I stop explaining. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because explanation would cheapen what's already understood. You're still here, I'm still here, and nothing between us needs narration anymore. I've learned something about myself through this. I don't fear endings, I fear dilution. I fear letting something precise become vague. I fear turning recognition into routine. I fear allowing depth to erode into familiarity without intention. So I won't do that. I won't reach for you to test whether you'd reach back. I won't manufacture moments to keep this alive. I won't lean into ambiguity and call it mystery. If something is real, it doesn't require noise to survive. And this, whatever this is, has been quiet from the start. You don't look at me waiting for reassurance. You don't look at me asking for permission. You don't look at me hoping. You look at me like someone who understands that not all connections are meant to continue. Some are meant to clarify. And clarity is exactly what this gave me. You showed me where my control ends and where choice begins. You showed me that not every person who reaches depth is meant to stay there. Some are meant to confirm it exists. You showed me that recognition doesn't always demand union. Sometimes it simply demands honesty. So here it is, without softness, without drama. I see you, fully, accurately. And because I see you, I won't misuse this moment by pretending it needs more than it does. I won't cling. I won't collapse distance out of fear. I won't force continuation just to avoid the weight of stillness. If you stay, it will be because you choose to, not because I made room. If you leave, it will be clean, not because something broke, but because nothing needed to. That's the difference between loss and completion. I don't need this to turn into something else, to validate what it already was. Some connections don't evolve, they seal. They lock something into place inside you, and then step away, leaving you changed but intact. You were never here to save me. You were never here to be saved. You were here to meet me, once clearly without distortion, and that happened. So this is where I stop holding the moment open, not with regret, not with longing, not with resistance, but with respect for the depth we didn't exploit, for the silence we didn't cheapen, for the recognition we didn't try to own. If we cross paths again, it won't be by accident. And if we don't, nothing about this was wasted. Because some people don't enter your life to stay, they enter to remind you who you are when no one is asking you to be less. And that's enough. What comes after is an emptiness. That's the mistake people make. They think when something ends without noise, it leaves a void. It doesn't. It leaves clarity. The silence after you didn't echo, it resolved. Like a sound that finally found the frequency it belonged to and stopped vibrating. I didn't miss you the way people miss what they depend on. I didn't ache. I didn't spiral. I didn't rewrite moments trying to extract more meaning, because nothing was unfinished. You didn't take anything from me. You didn't leave anything behind that needed repair. You adjusted something internal and then you stepped back. That's rare. Most people leave residue, confusion, unanswered questions, emotional debris that takes months to clean. You left alignment. I noticed it in how my silence felt afterward, lighter, but sharper. Not guarded, not empty, just exact. You didn't make me softer. You didn't make me harder. You made me truer. Truer to the pace I move at. Truer to the depth I require. Truer to the standards I won't lower just to feel occupied. And that's the part no one talks about. Some people don't stay, but they set the bar. After you, I don't mistake intensity for connection. I don't mistake attention for understanding. I don't mistake proximity for alignment. I know the difference now. I know what it feels like when someone doesn't want to be inside you, but already is. I know what recognition feels like when it doesn't ask to be fed. And because I know that, I don't chase echoes anymore. I don't try to recreate what was never meant to repeat. You didn't become a memory I revisit. You became a reference point, a quiet calibration, a reminder that depth doesn't announce itself, it resonates. And once you've felt that resonance, everything else feels like noise. So no, this isn't longing, this isn't loss. This is the after effect of something precise passing through my life without damaging it. Like pressure, applied exactly where it was needed, and then released. You didn't change my direction, you confirmed it. And that's why when I think of you now, there's no tension in my chest, no unresolved pull, no unfinished sentence. Just recognition, settled, intact, complete. Some connections don't ask to continue. They exist to complete something in you, then disappear quietly so you can move forward unconflicted. You were never meant to be carried. You were meant to be understood and then released. And I did that without resistance. That's how I know this wasn't attachment, it was alignment. And alignment doesn't linger. It reorients, then lets you walk on. This is the part no one notices, not because it's small, but because it's internal. After you, I didn't become louder, I didn't become softer, I didn't become more open or more closed. I became cleaner, cleaner in my choices, cleaner in my boundaries, cleaner in my tolerance for what doesn't match my depth. You didn't leave a mark on my heart, you refined my perception. That's the rarest kind of impact. I no longer wonder if I'm asking for too much. I no longer negotiate my standards in the name of potential. I no longer entertain confusion as if it were chemistry, because now I know what alignment feels like, and it doesn't bargain, it doesn't rush, it doesn't perform, it doesn't need to be witnessed. It simply exists or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I move on without needing to explain why. You taught me something without trying to teach me. That recognition doesn't require permanence to be powerful. Most people believe meaning comes from duration, from how long something lasts, from how much space it occupies. They're wrong. Meaning comes from precision, from how accurately something meets you, exactly where you are, not where you pretend to be. You met me there. And because of that, I don't seek repetition. I seek accuracy. I don't want intensity. I want resonance. I don't want closeness. I want congruence. After you, my silence isn't defensive, it's selective. My distance isn't fear, it's discernment. My presence isn't availability, it's intention. I don't carry you forward with me. I don't reference you in new connections. I don't compare. Because you weren't a benchmark, you were a calibration. A moment where everything aligned long enough for me to see myself clearly. And once you've seen yourself clearly, you don't need mirrors anymore. You walk differently after that, not cautious, not guarded, exact. So if there's a final truth in all of this, it's this. Some people enter your life not to be loved, not to be kept, not to be returned to, but to strip away illusion, to show you what depth actually feels like, so you never mistake noise for meaning again. You did that quietly, accurately, without trying. And because of that, nothing about me is unfinished. I don't look back. I move forward, aligned, unconflicted, undiluted. That's what remains. And it's enough.